national recruiting analyst. John Garcia, I hope you're doing well. Welcome into the game in Tuscaloosa.
Doing well, Ryan. How about yourself?
I'm good. Marquise tells me that you're at a restaurant today.
Yeah. I'm hoping it's not too loud.
No,
but I
you
think
sound
so
great.
Far, so good.
You sound great. I mean, we like the little noises in the background. I mean, just tell me what you're doing. Are you having a good meal, or are you about to have a meal, or are you already finished?
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's on the way now. Actually, just getting to the table. Just spending some family time before heading out to the opening this weekend to check out the latest with really the best competition in the country in terms of high school kids versus high school kids. So just a little R&R before we really ramp it up this weekend and into next week down in Dallas for the first time.
But I want to talk about the opening. But before we kind of segue, it seems like Nick Saban is off to a dynamic start. Now, we've talked about this before, but here we go again. I mean, there's a lot of these assistant coaches out here declaring that this may be the best ever, this thing's Hall of Fame type class. And I know I've asked you this before, but it seems like every week something is changing and the momentum continues to build around this 2019 class, man.
Yeah, and I think even though we've talked about the Bama coaches on social media, now they're making bold predictions and they're kind of putting their flag down Baker Mayfield style, saying, hey, we're going to be number one again. They're using words like legendary, best of all time, and it's not just one. It's Josh Gaddis, it's Brent Key, even Carl Scott, the defensive backs coach who probably hasn't been talked about enough in terms of what he's doing. Even they're tweeting about it. So that's when momentum really, does exist. It's to the point where the coaches are putting stuff like that out before we even learn of the tangible commitment news. So I think it means new guys are obviously right on board, like Keelan Robinson, the running back. But it also means this thing isn't done. The momentum, the round of commitments could still be upon us, even though we're technically in a dead period where, these kids can't even make visits or they can't even receive phone calls from the coaches, but they can initiate the contact, and obviously they darn sure can still make commitments.
Let me ask you about Carson Beck here for a couple of minutes. As you look at the size, you look at the style of play, is there anything to read into that?
Yeah. This is an athlete. I think stereotypically, 6'4", 220, you don't think about a guy who's mobile. You don't think about a guy who's going to execute whatever this new age of offense at Alabama is going to be with the Jalen Hurts, Tua Tagovailoas of the world. But you pop on the tape and you realize that he's committed to Alabama baseball as well. And now you say, okay, 2 years of high school left with, raw talent, raw athleticism. And it kind of goes along with what we've seen. That's the trend. The classic, immobile guy is going to be few and far between. Doesn't mean Alabama won't recruit those guys, but it looks like more times than not, there are going to be guys who will at least have the capability to move and make plays with their legs. Not necessarily as a runner like Jalen Hurts, but even in the pocket to extend plays, which I think Tua is better at. And some of the new quarterbacks that Alabama is going to bring in are a little bit more kind of headed in that direction. So I think Beck has the foundation to become that. Now, depending on how big he gets, we don't know. He's already well over 200 pounds. So we'll see kind of how he develops. Remember, a class of 2020, so he's got 2 full years of high school ball remaining at a really, prestigious program, Providence Day in Jacksonville. This is a great facilities, great structure type of program. So you expect him to fill out considerably and be, Jake Coker style when he actually gets to Alabama. And obviously he was athletic enough to extend plays and make plays that few expected of him.
But, John, you don't think there's anything that you can try to guess a little bit? And I know you talked to a lot of these guys, but does it give us a little clue, not just with one commitment, but everybody they seem to be going after? We could even go back to the 2018 class. It seems like that they're going after a lot of different, it seems that they're changing styles. Maybe they're going back to more of this pro set. We've seen this for a couple of years, but it seems like more obvious now that they're going to go back and really utilize these skill guys, running backs out of the backfield, maybe a little bit smaller than we're typically used to. Is that am I overanalyzing that, or is that Is there some
No,
clues there?
you're right on it. And I think what makes it kind of balanced and not going pure dual threat, run first, developmental passer type, which clearly they're not doing anymore. The two guys in 2019 committed right now, pass first guys. Carson Beck in 2020, pass first guy. But I think what it's telling you, there's going to be more balance to that. We've seen them bring in two quarterbacks multiple times. They're bringing in two this year. And I think taking a guy like Beck so early probably means there's a plan to take more than one eventually in 2020, although for all intents and purposes, they're telling Carson Beck he's the only guy. I think that eventually changes. And I think, again, it brings you back to the current quarterback room and the climate of that room. There is some unknowns that are going to transpire here in the next several months. And it's like Nick isn't going to – he's going to make sure that he doesn't have another class like 2018 where he doesn't get a quarterback, because it was kind of a Murphy's Law situation. You don't get a quarterback in 2018 of any variety, dual threat or pro style, and now all of a sudden there's a competition with two young guys, and in theory, one is going to be on the move. So you really thin out that quarterback room. And I think above all else, this is Nick making sure something like that doesn't happen. I don't know if they've ever taken a quarterback, at least in the last few years, this early, 2 years out, only having started, I think, 4 varsity games. It's just not something we're used to, which is part of the reason why Beck was kind of a surprise, at least to me.
All right. As I look at this upcoming signing class that will sign in December, is there any chance they take another quarterback, or do you think they're done?
I think the number is going to be 2.
Okay.
They have 2 right now, obviously, so they're going to remain on that track with Paul Tyson, with Talia Tagovailoa. But there is at least some degree of worry with Tagovailoa. Obviously, the likelihood of him departing the class could partially be contingent on his brother. I think that's very clear to read into. The kid is in Tuscaloosa more than any other recruit, maybe ever, in terms of before he gets to Alabama. He is with Tua all the time. He's working out with him. He's spending time with him. He's attached to the hip. But there is obviously the unknown out there with this quarterback battle. Even though we all expect Tua to win it, or at least get the lion's share of the reps, there is still technically that unknown. And other schools are beginning to point to that. Hey, you're our guy, regardless of what happens at Bama. We are only taking one quarterback. You're the guy. They're focused on that with Talia, and it's mainly Tennessee and LSU. So both of those schools, though, recently took a quarterback. So I think that paints a bit of a picture on the likelihood of Talia staying with this commitment, which is fully what I expect at this point. But it is not, 100% sure, although, is anything 100% sure in this day and age of recruiting? I'm not sure. But I think the timing of Alabama offering another 2019 quarterback, Cornelius Brown, an in-state kid from Calera, who's coached by Andrew Zhao, by the way, that kind of ruffled some feathers with the fans and made people wonder, what is the plan? As far as I know, the plan is still 2. And at the end of the day, it'll be a matter of which 2. But again, at this point, it is clear that Paul Tyson and Talia Tagovailoa are the most likely duo. If something should happen with one of those guys, then a guy like Cornelius Brown comes into the spotlight. But he's been told, hold off, don't make a move right now because, although we've extended this verbal offer, which is non-binding, it cannot be accepted at this point. So I think the clarity of that is a little bit of the fear of Tagovailoa departing the class.
John, is this kind of like you're dating a woman, she becomes committed, but she's still not willing to delete the old boyfriend's number out of the phone?
Something like that. I think it goes back to Tua in another way, Ryan. I think Tua committed to Alabama in May of his senior year as he was on his ascent. He hadn't gone through that magical Elite 11 run. He hadn't become the most talked about recruit in America at the time where he committed to Alabama. Oregon, which a lot of people thought was kind of his dream school, having the Marcus Mariota connection, didn't even offer him until after he was committed to Alabama. USC, which was his public dream school, hadn't really focused in and drove home how important he was on their board. But Tua, when he committed, sort of shut it down. And I don't think he regrets that, but in fostering advice to his little brother with the recruiting process, I believe the message was shared, hey, visit schools, go out and see what's out there just in case. So I think this is more due diligence than anything. And Talia has continued to say, hey, I'm going to visit Tennessee. I'm going to visit LSU. And obviously, again, he's at Alabama every weekend and sometimes 3, 4, 5, 6 days in a row where he's making that drive just to hang out with Tua. So I don't think there's a ton of worry. I think this is just a kid taking Big Brother's advice and kind of living in the modern era of recruiting. With your analogy, Ryan, basically nobody deletes the old boyfriend, girlfriend number from their phone.
Well, and I just
kind of the way it is.
Yeah, I just got to kind of look for Marquise when I said that. I didn't realize that I'm not up on the current trends. Okay, I'm usually about 15 years behind, so I'll catch up on all the verbiage at a later date. John Garcia, college football recruiting analyst, 247 Sports, Yellowhammer 247, Crimson and Blue Chips podcast. John, let me just make you real quick here. Part of the conversation that we're going to have today. If Alabama is hoisting up that national championship trophy in Santa Clara, California, coming up in January, what will be the number one reason you think that this team will get the job done? Why will Alabama win the national title in 2018? What do you think is the number one reason?
Wow. That's a heck of a question. I think it comes down to, like kind of you hinted at, kind of getting back to the basics. A lot of people are going to focus on this quarterback situation, and rightfully so. But I think at the end of the day, it will come down to the trenches. Getting in a scenario like last year where you had to throw your way out of the hole to hoist the trophy, it just doesn't seem like that is going to happen again. I think it'll feel much more like a classic Alabama team in terms of winning the trenches with that talented offensive line and a couple of potential superstars on that D-line, and also running the football much more than people are going to anticipate. If Tua is the guy at some point, everyone's going to think that Alabama's going to go out there and throw the ball 45 times a game. And maybe I'm old school or stubborn, but I do not see a Nick Saban team doing that week in, week out in the SEC with the target on their back that they have each and every week. So I think it'll be more of a classic Alabama team if they're going to get back there, win the trenches, run the football. Doesn't mean there can't be more explosive passing plays, but I think the volume people are going to expect should get the lion's share is going to be a little bit off from what actually happens, at least under Nick Saban.
All right, John, let me flip side of that. If Alabama's not hoisting the trophy up in Santa Clara, what do you think will be the faults and the defaults of this team that doesn't allow them to get there or get the job done?
I would think maybe flipping it myself and saying, maybe Bama gets past happy, or a lack of a leader emerging on the defense. I think the secondary and the linebackers have a ton of talent, not a ton of experience, but I think you will need that rallying guy, the Ha Clinton, Eddie Jackson, C.J. Mosley. I think that guy, Rashaan Evans last year, that guy has to emerge, and it's really beyond X's and O's and his position. It could be a corner. It could be a D lineman. It could be Raekwon Davis for all we know. But I think that guy needs to emerge in the first few weeks of the season to kind of be the rallying guy to get Bama out of a tough situation and to line guys up right, because as this decade of dominance continues, there's just more and more available video. So Tua won't be able to surprise somebody with his ability. Nobody's going to be surprised by it like Georgia might have been in that championship game. So the defense will always have to be a major element of this Alabama team, especially under Nick. So who is kind of the guy when it's hitting the fan, who everyone looks to help them reverse that? I think that could be a determining factor as well. That guy needs to emerge. And for what we know right now, I don't think it's very clear at this point.
Well, John, you say that, and when you talk about leadership, and I promise you I'm going to let you go after this right here, but when you said the leadership, the first thing that went to my mind, I go back to November when that team was funeral home dead on the sidelines, and they needed a leader down in Lee County, and I saw no emotions. John, I'm Pentecostal, okay? I've been to funerals that had more energy than was on that sidelines down in Auburn, and I don't know if that really came across on the television screen, but it was no energy. There was no emotions, and you talk about leader, and I got thinking about that. You need that big time leader to step forward, and see exactly who emerges on that side of the football. It's an excellent point. It's one that I probably didn't think about, but immediately when you said it, it took me back to Lee County in November.
Yeah, and I was actually at an Auburn camp couple weeks ago, and man, they are that Alabama game and that Georgia game where they won. I mean, that talk about a recruiting pitch. That is pretty much the embodiment of the Auburn recruiting pitch. So yeah, so maybe that resonated in other ways as well, in terms of the lack of energy and kind of how flat everything looked flat that game, on the field, off the field, the whole 9 yards. Obviously, it was kind of a moot point, which is ironic in this day and age of college football. But I agree with you. It was almost like I don't even remember some of that game because it was so flat and it was so kind of non-Bama-ish. Because yeah, like you said, usually even when things aren't 100% great, those guys are pretty rowdy out there, on the field, off the field, all of that. So yeah, finding a guy who can spur that, I think will be important for this team altogether, and certainly the defense with so much inexperience going to be on that field, basically no matter what that depth chart looks like come September 1st.
John Garcia _Jr. there. John Garcia _Jr. on the Twitter account. Follow him, college football recruiting analyst on the national and regional side for 247 Sports, Yellowhammer 247, and the Crimson and Blue Chips podcast that you can hear weekly, a couple of times a week there. Connect with him, BamaOnline.com. But the best way to connect with everything that he's involved in is straight up at John Garcia _Jr. John, as always, thank you so much, and we'll look forward to catching up maybe after the opening, and you can give us kind of maybe what you saw out there. John, I appreciate you. Hope you have a great weekend.
Thank you, Ryan. Yeah, let's see if Talia can do what Tua did at this event. So all eyes will be on him, and we'll be down there for it live.